The library at Hollow Creek High School was the oldest part of the entire campus. Everything else had been modernized: bright white hallways, polished linoleum floors, security cameras on every corner, and a glass-walled cafeteria filled with sunlight. But the library was different. It had survived every renovation, every storm, and every budget cut. Its dark oak shelves, warped wooden floorboards, and the faint, ever-present scent of dust and paper made it feel like a time capsule from another world. Students often said that the library wasn't really part of Hollow Creek High at all. According to old records, it had been inherited from Hollow Creek Academy, a private boarding school that stood there long before the high school was built. The academy had closed after a fire in 1953 that took the lives of 19 students. When the new high school opened in the 70s, the surviving west wing of the old academy had been rebuilt into the library. Teachers avoided talking about it, but everyone in town knew the story. Still, the strangest rumor of all was about the last shelf, the one tucked away in the farthest corner of the back wall, half hidden by shadows and a sagging curtain. There was a small metal chain stretched across it and a faded paper sign that read, in crooked handwriting, "Restricted. Do not open." Nobody ever questioned it too seriously. The students assumed it was just old or damaged books. Mrs. Harrow, the librarian, never allowed anyone near it. She wasn't cruel, just firm. If someone asked, she would simply smile tightly and say, "That section isn't for students." And that was the end of the conversation. For decades, the rule went unquestioned. Until 3 students decided to break it. Ethan Carter, Liam Brooks, and Chloe Rivera were juniors, friends since middle school, though friends might have been generous. Ethan was the instigator of almost every bit of trouble they got into. Smart but restless, he hated rules that didn't have reasons. Liam was quieter, the voice of reason who often got dragged along because he didn't like saying no. Chloe, the yearbook photographer, liked stories that sounded like they belonged in a movie. She had a habit of treating every mystery like an adventure waiting to be documented. It was a rainy Friday in October when the idea came up. The storm had been relentless all day, and lunch period was cancelled due to lightning. Students were told to stay indoors. The 3 of them ended up in the library, sitting at a corner table where the light flickered slightly with each rumble of thunder. Chloe had been flipping through an old school yearbook, one from the early 50s that Mrs. Harrow kept in a display case. She pointed at a faded black and white photo of a girl smiling in a checkered dress. The caption read, "Margaret Hale, Class of 1953. Chloe whispered that her older sister had told her a story about the fire, how Margaret Hale was the only student marked present in the attendance records after the tragedy. All the others were listed as missing or deceased. Ethan grinned, intrigued. A mystery. A name. A forbidden part of the library. He said they should see if that shelf really held old records. Liam tried to laugh it off, but he couldn't hide the nervous glance he cast toward the dark back corner. The rain hammered harder against the windows. The lights flickered again, and Mrs. Harrow, sitting at her desk near the entrance, didn't even seem to notice. She just typed away quietly, the rhythmic click of her keys the only steady sound in the room. By the end of the school day, the plan was set. The 3 would come back after hours. No teachers, no librarians, just them and the mystery of the last shelf. When the final bell rang, they pretended to leave with everyone else, then doubled back. Ethan knew the side door's latch never closed properly. They slipped in around 6, long after the custodians had left. The storm was still raging outside, wind howling through the eaves, the sky flashing white every few seconds. The library was darker than they expected. Only a few emergency lights cast dim orange pools across the floor. Their footsteps echoed as they crept between the rows of shelves. Dust drifted in the air, glowing faintly in the light of their phone flashlights. Liam hesitated. He whispered that maybe they should wait until Monday, maybe ask Mrs. Harrow directly. Ethan ignored him and kept walking. The air grew colder as they moved toward the back. The floor creaked beneath their sneakers. At last, they stood before the final shelf. It leaned slightly to one side, its wooden edges rough and splintered with age. The chain hung loosely across the middle, the restricted sign half torn. Ethan ran his hand over it. The wood was cold, unnaturally so, like touching metal in winter. He unhooked the chain and dropped it to the floor. Behind the first row of dusty books, he noticed something unusual. The books didn't have titles, just numbers etched into their spines. He pulled one out. The cover read, in fading gold letters, Hollow Creek Academy, Attendance 1953. He opened it carefully. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with neat handwriting. A list of names, each marked with a check mark next to the word present. Every line had been crossed out in thick black ink, except the last one. Margaret Hale, present. Chloe leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. She said that was the same name from the yearbook photo. Liam muttered that it was probably just coincidence. Then, before they could say another word, the lights went out. Everything was silent for a moment except the rain outside. Then came a faint sound, like pages turning in the dark. Ethan lifted his phone to look around. The beam shook in his hand. Chloe's flashlight caught the edge of the shelf, and for a split second, they saw something move behind it. A whisper floated through the air, barely audible. It was soft, like breath against their ears. Liam froze. Chloe's eyes went wide. The whisper came again, closer this time. The books began to tremble, one by one. Dust fell like ash from the shelves. A single book slid out and dropped to the floor. Then another. Then all at once, they began to fly outward, scattering across the room. Ethan picked up the attendance book again, his hands trembling. A new line of ink was appearing beneath Margaret Hale's name. His breath caught. He dropped the book. Liam grabbed his arm, shouting that they had to go. But the whisper was growing louder now, overlapping, multiplying, voices of dozens of students all murmuring the same word. Present. 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 They ran for the exit. The door was only a few feet away, but when Ethan grabbed the handle, it wouldn't move. It felt locked, though he'd left it open. The metal was ice cold, burning his skin. He yanked harder. Nothing. The library fell silent again. Then came a deep, creaking sound from behind them. The last shelf had shifted forward, scraping against the floor. Behind it, a thin sliver of light glowed through a crack in the wall. Ethan turned slowly. He could see what looked like a narrow passage hidden behind the shelf. He stepped toward it before the others could stop him and pushed the shelf aside. A rush of cold air swept out, carrying the faint scent of smoke and something older, something burnt and forgotten. Beyond the crack was a small room, its walls blackened by soot. A single desk sat in the center, covered in ashes and half-melted candles. On the far wall, written in faded red paint, were the words, "All students must be accounted for." The air was so cold that their breath came out in visible clouds. Ethan's flashlight flickered. On the desk lay another attendance sheet, charred around the edges. He picked it up carefully. Every name was marked present, but the last few had been crossed out violently, gouged through with what looked like fingernails instead of ink. Liam whispered that they needed to leave, but before they could move, a soft sob broke the silence. From the corner of the room, a figure emerged, a girl in a burn school uniform. Her skin was pale and cracked, her hair hanging in clumps over her face. Smoke curled faintly around her shoulders. Her eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to swallow the light. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "You're late for roll call." Chloe screamed. Ethan stumbled back. The door they'd come through slammed shut. The girl tilted her head. "You weren't here before," she said. "Now you are." The attendance book on the desk snapped open by itself. The pages flipped rapidly until the pen marks began to move again, forming new names. Liam Brooks, present. Chloe Rivera, present. Ethan shouted for it to stop, but the girl just stared at him. "You came when you weren't called," she whispered. Her voice echoed as if more than one person were speaking at once. Ethan grabbed a candle from the desk and threw it. The wax splattered across the wall, but the flame reignited midair and crawled upward. The girl's cracked lips curved into a faint smile. Fire doesn't hurt me anymore. Flames erupted along the walls. Smoke filled the tiny room. Chloe coughed, stumbling toward the far end where she spotted a small, boarded-up window. Ethan smashed it open with a chair. Rain poured in, the wind howling through the gap. Chloe climbed first, cutting her hands on the glass. Liam followed, dragging himself through. Ethan was last, but as he pulled himself up, something gripped his ankle. The girl's cold fingers wrapped around him. Her empty eyes stared up. "You can't leave," she whispered. "You're on the list now." Ethan kicked wildly, screaming. Liam reached through the window, grabbed his arm, and pulled with all his strength. With one final wrench, Ethan broke free. The three of them fell out into the mud and the rain. When they looked back through the shattered window, the fire was gone. The room was dark. The shelf looked untouched. They ran until the school was a blur behind them. None of them spoke on the way home. The next morning, the principal didn't believe a word of their story. The library was fine, no burn marks, no broken window, no fallen books. When they tried to show the attendance records, the shelf was full of ordinary textbooks. Mrs. Harrow was calm but pale when she called them into her office. Her voice shook as she said, "You opened it, didn't you?" Ethan nodded slowly. She told them the truth. Margaret Hale had been a student the night the academy burned down. She wasn't in her seat during evening roll call, and she was the only one who survived. When they found the attendance book in the ashes, every name had been marked present except hers. For years, the staff believed her spirit lingered, still trying to finish attendance. That was why the shelf was sealed, the books hidden, so no one would disturb her routine. Chloe whispered, "So she stayed?" Mrs. Harrow's eyes filled with tears. She stayed to finish roll call. After that day, things changed. Chloe stopped coming to the library altogether. Liam transferred schools at semester break. Ethan tried to act like nothing had happened, but he started having dreams, always the same one. He'd hear the whisper behind him, soft and slow. "Present." He'd wake up drenched in sweat, his phone alarm showing 3:33 a.m. every time. 3 weeks later, Chloe didn't show up to class. Her locker was open. Her backpack sat untouched. No one saw her leave. When Ethan went to the library that afternoon, the restricted sign was gone. In its place was a new one, "Do not disturb during roll call." On the librarian's desk sat the old attendance book, perfectly clean. Only one fresh name was written on the page. Chloe Rivera, present. Beneath it, a blank line waited, the pen resting beside it. Ethan Carter, he didn't stay long enough to see it finish. Now, years later, Hollow Creek High has been renovated again. The library is bright and modern, with glass walls and touchscreen computers. Students love the new look, but in the far corner, there's still one untouched section, a single old shelf with no catalog number. Sometimes, during morning roll call, a student might swear they hear something from that direction. A faint scratching sound, like a pen moving across paper. And if they linger a moment too long, they'll feel a chill brush against their ear and a soft, calm voice whisper one word. It was a quiet evening in late October when the Callahan family checked into the old hotel nestled in a small, forgotten town in the heart of the United States. John and Rebecca, both in their late 30s, had decided to take their two children, Emily, aged 10, and Charlie, aged 6, on a weekend getaway to celebrate the end of the school year. The air was crisp, the trees a fiery mix of red, orange, and yellow, and the sun was beginning to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows over the empty streets. Their destination, the Hollow Springs Inn. An establishment that had been in operation since the 1800s, with a history as long as the town itself. It was charming in its own way, with its weathered brick exterior, vintage wallpaper in the hallways, and squeaky wooden floors that seemed to echo the whispers of a past long gone. The hotel had recently been refurbished, though with modern amenities, Wi-Fi, flat-screen TVs, and heated pools. Everything seemed fine at first glance. But there was something about the place that didn't feel entirely right. The check-in process was quick. The receptionist, a pale woman in her 50s with sharp features, greeted them with a thin smile. "Room 111, she said, handing over the keys. "It's a bit special, but you'll enjoy your stay." Rebecca, slightly confused, smiled back. "Special? In what way?" The receptionist paused, her eyes darting briefly toward the ceiling before she quickly cleared her throat. "Oh, nothing to worry about. Just an old room. All the charm, you know? Just make sure not to wander after dark. The hallways can get a little strange." John chuckled, trying to brush off the odd remark. "Thanks for the warning," he said, taking the keys and leading his family toward the elevator. Room 111 was located on the 3rd floor, at the far end of a long, dimly lit hallway. The door creaked as it opened, revealing a spacious room with antique furniture, an oversized 4-poster bed, a velvet armchair near the window, and an old oak wardrobe in the corner. There was a musty smell in the air, but it wasn't enough to turn them away. Emily immediately rushed to the window, pressing her face against the glass and peering out into the darkening evening. "This place is so cool," she said, excited by the large, vintage feel of the room. Charlie ran toward the bed, jumping up and down. "I want to sleep here tonight." Rebecca smiled at her children's enthusiasm. "Well, it's going to be our home for the next couple of days, so let's make the most of it." John, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He noticed the edges of the curtains fluttering in an almost unnatural way, even though the window was firmly closed. It felt like there was a draft, yet there was no source for it. He shrugged it off, figuring it was just the building's age catching up with it. After unpacking, the Callahans decided to take a walk around the town. They enjoyed a casual dinner at a local diner, with the owner, an elderly man with a deep southern drawl, telling them stories about the history of Hollow Springs. He mentioned the hotel briefly but spoke of it in hushed tones, as if not wanting to draw attention to its past. "You folks be careful with that hotel," he said, leaning in closer. "A lot of strange things happen there. You might think it's all harmless at first, but you'd be wrong. Stay away from room 111 if you know what's good for YA." John laughed, thinking the man was just playing a part to entertain the tourists. "Thanks for the tip," he said, dismissing it as an old man's superstition. By the time they returned to the hotel, the sun had set, and the building had taken on an even more eerie presence. The hallway was now completely dark, with only dim lights flickering overhead. As they reached room 111, Rebecca unlocked the door, and they stepped inside. The temperature in the room had dropped noticeably. The warm air they had left behind now felt cold, almost icy. Emily and Charlie were already climbing into bed, their faces glowing with excitement from the day's adventures. But John and Rebecca both felt a lingering sense of unease. The room seemed to hum with a strange energy. John went to the bathroom to wash up, and when he returned, he noticed the shadows in the room seemed deeper, darker, as if they were moving on their own. The corner of the room, near the wardrobe, felt especially cold. He could almost feel someone, or something, watching him. He shook his head, trying to rationalize the feeling. It was just the stress of travel, he told himself. Rebecca, however, was having her own unsettling experience. She had heard faint footsteps in the hallway, light and quick, as if someone were running. But when she opened the door to check, no one was there. "John," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I think we should go down to the lobby and ask for a different room." Before John could respond, the lights flickered, and the temperature dropped even further. Charlie, who had been playing with his toy car, suddenly stopped and looked toward the wardrobe. His eyes widened in terror. "Mommy, Daddy, there's someone in the closet." Rebecca and John turned, but the wardrobe door was closed. There was no sound, no movement. It was as if the room had frozen. That night, the haunting escalated. The family barely slept. Emily had nightmares of shadowy figures standing by her bed, whispering things she couldn't understand. Charlie was up several times, screaming that he saw someone standing in the hallway. But when John opened the door, nothing was there. By morning, the Callahans were exhausted and on edge. John, ever the skeptic, tried to rationalize it all. "Old buildings do strange things," he muttered. "There's got to be a logical explanation for everything." But that afternoon, when Rebecca returned from the lobby after a visit to the front desk, she looked pale, her face etched with fear. She pulled John aside. "They know about room 111, she whispered, her voice shaking. "They told me it's been the site of strange occurrences for decades. People have disappeared. Some have claimed to see figures in the mirrors, others have heard voices, like someone's calling their name. And the last family who stayed here, well, they didn't make it out." John's heart raced. He was beginning to believe there was something more to the hotel than just age and wear. The stories he had dismissed as superstition were starting to feel all too real. On their last night, the atmosphere in room 111 became suffocating. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the air was thick with tension. Emily was crying, clutching her stuffed bear tightly, while Charlie refused to leave his parents' side. The mirrors began to fog up, even though the room was far too cold for condensation to form. As they huddled together in the center of the room, the door to the wardrobe slowly creaked open on its own. The temperature dropped so sharply that their breaths fogged in the air. And then, it began. Soft whispers, like distant voices, echoed through the room, growing louder and more insistent with each passing second. The shadows in the corner began to twist, taking on shapes that no one could explain. John grabbed Rebecca's hand, pulling her and the children toward the door. "Run," he whispered, his voice a mix of fear and determination. But as they reached the hallway, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang, trapping them in the dark corridor. The whispers grew louder, now unmistakably coming from behind them. They turned to see a shadowy figure emerging from the dark, its form barely discernible but its presence unmistakable. It was time to leave. The Callahans never returned to Hollow Springs Inn. They checked out the next morning, their spirits broken, their nerves frazzled, and their minds haunted by the horrors they'd experienced in room 111. They left town, but the memory of that night stayed with them forever. No one else dared to stay in room 111 after the Callahans left. The hotel eventually closed its doors, and Hollow Springs faded into obscurity. But some say that on quiet nights, you can still hear the faint whispers of those who were lost in that cursed room, waiting for someone else to wander in and disturb the silence once more. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? A shadow in the corner of your eye, a cold draft in a room that should be warm, or a voice when no one else is around? Share your own paranormal experiences with us. Who knows, your story might be the next to haunt room 111. The Whitmore mansion stood on the edge of rural Pennsylvania, its blackened windows staring out at the forest like the empty sockets of a skull. Locals swore the place was cursed. They told stories about people who entered and never came back, about the walls moving like a living creature after midnight, trapping anyone foolish enough to stay. Most dismissed it as small-town ghost lore, but to me, it was the perfect chance to prove everyone wrong. I'd been running a small horror exploration channel on YouTube, and I wanted a real scare, something that would pull in views. So on a cold October evening, I packed my camera, flashlight, and sleeping bag, determined to spend the night inside the mansion. I didn't believe in shifting houses, but by the time the sun rose, I'd learned just how alive a house could be. The driveway was nothing but cracked gravel and weeds. My car's headlight swept over the massive silhouette of the Whitmore mansion, revealing peeling paint and warped wood. A cold wind howled through broken shutters, making the place seem almost awake. I parked and stepped out into the biting air. The front doors loomed at least 10 feet high, their faded red paint flaking under my touch. With a groan, one of them swung open on its own. I told myself it was the wind, but a shiver ran up my spine as I stepped inside. The entry hall was enormous, wide staircase curving upward into darkness, a chandelier hanging from a chain so rusted it looked ready to snap. My boots clicked on the marble floor, each step echoing far longer than it should have. The air smelled of dust and something faintly metallic. I explored for hours. The dining hall still had a long table, set with dishes coated in grime. The study was lined with books whose pages crumbled at the touch. Upstairs, bedrooms lay in decay, broken beds, torn curtains, and dressers left open as if someone had left in a hurry. At 11:30 p.m., I returned to the first floor and spread my sleeping bag in the drawing room. I figured I'd get some rest before midnight, before the time the so-called shifting was supposed to happen. Outside, the forest swayed in the wind. Inside, it was utterly still. I woke to a sound. Not the creak of settling wood, but something heavier like furniture scraping across a floor. I sat up, heart pounding, and checked my phone. 12:01 a.m. My flashlight beam cut across the room, and I froze. The doorway I had walked through earlier wasn't there anymore. In its place was a wall. I stood, panic clawing at my chest, and ran to the opposite side of the room, expecting the hall to be there. Instead, I found a narrow corridor I didn't remember. The scraping sound came again, closer this time. I followed the corridor, hoping it led to the entry hall, but it twisted sharply, then again, leading me deeper into the house. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing strange symbols carved into the wood beneath. At some point, I realized I was walking in circles. I passed the same toppled chair twice, but the walls around it kept changing, sometimes wood-paneled, sometimes brick, sometimes plaster. My flashlight flickered, and in that moment of darkness, I heard a whisper right next to my ear. "Stay." I spun around, but no one was there. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed as I searched for an exit. Every time I turned a corner, the layout was different. I came to a hallway lined with mirrors, each one warped and cloudy. My reflection lagged behind my movements by a second, then smiled when I didn't. I smashed one of the mirrors with my flashlight. Behind it was not a wall, but another room, lit by a single candle. I climbed through the jagged glass frame, cutting my hand in the process. Inside the candlelit room was a small wooden table, and on it, 3 framed photographs. Each showed a different person, a young woman, an older man, and a boy around 12. All of them looked terrified, eyes wide as if staring at something behind the photographer. My stomach dropped when I noticed the background in all 3 photos. It was the exact room I was standing in. The candle blew out. Darkness swallowed me whole. I turned on my flashlight, but its beam barely reached a few feet ahead. From somewhere deep in the house, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, getting closer. I ran. Hallways twisted under my feet, doors opened into brick walls, and stairs led to ceilings. The house was moving faster now, almost as if it was guiding me somewhere. My lungs burned, my legs shook, but I couldn't stop. Then I entered a room I hadn't seen before. It was massive, circular, with walls lined in faded red velvet. In the center stood a grand 4-poster bed. Lying on it, pale as wax, was the boy from the photograph. His eyes darted toward me, and he opened his mouth to speak, but before a sound came out, the walls behind me slammed shut. The floor trembled, and the bed began to sink into it, dragging the boy down. I lunged forward to grab him, but an invisible force shoved me back so hard I hit the wall. When I looked again, the bed and the boy were gone. The room began to change around me. The red velvet walls faded into rotting wood, the floorboards curling upward like claws. I could feel the house breathing, slow, steady, each exhale rattling through the walls. In the corner, a door appeared where there hadn't been one before. I didn't hesitate. I threw it open and found myself in the entry hall again, the front doors just ahead. Relief surged through me, but when I reached for the handle, it wouldn't budge. Behind me, footsteps echoed. I turned and saw shapes emerging from the shadows, figures with empty eyes and slack jaws, their skin grey and cracked like old plaster. They moved slowly, but I could feel the air thickening, pressing me toward them. I slammed my shoulder into the door. Twice. On the third try, it burst open, and I stumbled out into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I looked back once, just in time to see the front doors of the Whitmore mansion swing shut on their own. The footage from my camera was mostly static, though a few frames showed warped hallways and shadowy figures. I posted the video online, but most viewers thought it was staged. Only one comment stood out, a username I didn't recognize. It read, "You left the door open. We can find you now." I moved out of Pennsylvania a week later. But some nights, when I wake in the dark, I swear my bedroom door is in a different place than it was the night before. My name's Ethan Cole. I was 16 when my mom moved us to a small town in Pennsylvania called Harriston, one of those quiet, woodsy towns where everyone seems to know each other and the high school looks like it's been standing there since the Civil War. We'd just moved from Chicago after my dad passed away. Mom said she needed a fresh start. I didn't argue, but I wasn't thrilled about being the new kid halfway through junior year. The first morning of school, the air was cold, foggy. Harriston High stood at the edge of town, surrounded by trees that looked almost black against the grey sky. The building itself was huge, old red brick, tall windows, a clock tower that didn't seem to work anymore. When I walked up to the front doors, I noticed something strange. One of the windows above the entrance had a crack running through it, like a spider web. And for just a second, I thought I saw someone standing there, a shadow, pale and still, looking down at me. Then I blinked, and it was gone. Inside, the hallways were crowded with students. Lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking on tile floors, teachers shouting directions. The usual chaos. But underneath the noise, there was something else, a weird tension in the air, like the whole building was holding its breath. My first class was history with Mr. Hargrove. When I walked in, everyone stopped talking for a second, typical new kid treatment. The teacher gave me a polite smile, handed me a textbook, and told me to take a seat in the back. As I sat down, the girl next to me leaned over. "You're new, right?" "Yeah," I said. "Ethan." "I'm Riley." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You got stuck with this class first period?" "Rough luck." I laughed awkwardly. "Why's that?" She didn't answer right away. Then, in a low voice, she said, "You'll see." Class went on as usual. Mr. Hargrove lectured about post-war America, and I tried to stay awake. But about halfway through, the lights flickered. Everyone looked up. It wasn't just a quick blink, they flickered on and off 3 times, in a slow rhythm, before settling again. Mr. Hargrove sighed. "Old wiring," he muttered. "This place is 100 years old." But Riley leaned closer to me. "It's not the wiring," she whispered. "It's him." I gave her a puzzled look. "Who?" She didn't respond, just stared at the back of the classroom, where the door to the storage closet stood slightly ajar. After class, I asked her again what she meant. She just shook her head. "Forget it. Just don't go near that room." The rest of the day was fine, boring, normal. I met a few other kids, got lost twice, ate lunch alone. By last period, I'd almost convinced myself that Riley was just messing with me. Then the fire alarm went off. It wasn't the usual blaring alarm, more like a long, distorted tone that echoed weirdly through the halls. Everyone froze. Then the intercom crackled to life. A voice, low, hoarse, said, "Remain in your classrooms." Teachers looked confused. One of them said the principal hadn't planned a drill. We stayed put. Minutes passed. The hallway lights dimmed slightly, and the sound of the alarm faded into silence. I glanced toward the door and realized something. The air outside was moving, like a faint ripple of heat. Then the doorknob turned, slowly. Everyone gasped. Mr. Hargrove stood up. "Who's out there?" he called. No answer. He walked to the door, opened it, and the hallway was empty. At least, that's what I thought until I noticed the faint trail of wet footprints leading away, small ones, barefoot, like a child's. That's when Riley whispered, "It's starting again." After school ended, I tried to ask her about it, but she bolted out the door before I could catch up. I walked home alone through the cold fog, replaying everything in my head, the flickering lights, the footprints, the weird voice. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard something faint, a scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across glass. I sat up and saw the window above my desk fogged up from the cold. And written in the condensation were 2 words, "Come back." I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe it had been written from the outside by condensation patterns, whatever. But when I got to school, I noticed everyone seemed tense. Kids were whispering, glancing over their shoulders. During homeroom, the principal came on the intercom. His voice sounded shaky. "Students, please stay calm. There's no cause for alarm, but some areas of the building will be closed today for maintenance." Whispers erupted. Riley turned in her seat and mouthed, "Room 212. That was our history class. When I got there, the door was taped off with yellow maintenance tape. Mr. Hargrove stood nearby, talking quietly to another teacher. I caught a glimpse inside. The desks had been pushed aside, and there was a dark stain spreading across the floor. It looked like water at first. But it wasn't. Later that day, Riley found me at lunch. "You saw it, didn't you?" "Yeah," I said. "What happened?" She hesitated, then leaned in. "You're not going to believe me. But there's something wrong with this school. It started before I was born. Before most of the teachers were even here." She told me about a student named Caleb Moore, a boy who went missing back in 1985. He was quiet, shy, always reading alone. One day he was sent to the storage room during detention to clean old desks. He never came out. At first, people thought he'd run away. But then the strange stuff started, flickering lights, voices over the intercom, footsteps in empty hallways. And sometimes, students claimed they saw him, a pale kid with wet hair, standing just beyond the classroom doors. The room he vanished from. Riley said, "It's right behind our history class. Room 212. I tried to laugh it off, but she wasn't smiling. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I stayed late after basketball tryouts, waited until the halls were empty, and slipped upstairs. The tape across room 212 was gone. The hallway lights flickered, and the air felt colder the closer I got. I pushed open the door. The smell hit me first, mold, dust, and something else, metallic and sharp. The classroom was dark except for a faint blue glow from the smartboard. Desks were scattered around like someone had moved them in a hurry. The storage closet door was open. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The closet was small, shelves stacked with old textbooks, chairs, and broken equipment. But at the back, half hidden under a top, was a mirror. It wasn't cracked or dirty. It looked new. Too new. And for a second, my reflection didn't move. I froze. I lifted my hand. My reflection stayed still. Then, slowly, it raised its hand, a beat too late, and smiled. I stumbled backward, my flashlight shaking. The reflection stepped closer, its face pale and wet-looking, eyes completely black. I turned and ran out of the room. When I looked back, the door was closed again. The next morning, the principal announced over the intercom that the East Wing would be temporarily closed for renovations. No explanation. Riley caught up to me between classes. "You went there, didn't you?" she said. I nodded. "There's a mirror in that room. Something's wrong with it." She paled. "They found it last year, after a pipe burst. They say it wasn't there before, like it appeared overnight. Every time someone looks into it too long, things start happening." "What kind of things?" I asked. She swallowed. "People disappear. That night, I tried to tell my mom everything. She brushed it off as stress. Said new schools were hard, that I was probably dreaming. But the next morning, when I looked in the bathroom mirror, there was condensation again, even though the air was cold and dry. And written across it, in smeared letters, 'See you soon.' I refused to go back to school the next day, but Mom made me. Said I couldn't skip just because of a nightmare. When I got there, the halls were quiet. Too quiet. The lights were dimmer than usual and there were fewer kids around. Riley wasn't at her locker. Mr. Hargrove wasn't in class. The intercom crackled again. "Ethan Cole, please report to room 212. My blood ran cold. I stood frozen while everyone else stared at me. "Go on," someone said. "They called you." I walked through the silent halls. When I reached the east wing, the door to room 212 was wide open, though it was supposed to be sealed. The mirror was still there, standing upright in the center of the room now. My reflection looked wrong, pale, blurred, like it was underwater. I stepped closer. The reflection smiled. Then it reached out, and I swear I saw the surface ripple, like water disturbed by a drop. Something pulled at my chest. I stumbled back, but my reflection didn't mimic me. It stepped forward, pressing its hand against the inside of the glass. I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for air. The principal and a few teachers were standing near the entrance, looking confused. I tried to explain, but when I looked back through the front doors, the hallway behind me was empty. No mirror. No room. Just brick wall. They said there was no room 212. That the old east wing had been closed and rebuilt years ago after a fire. I swore I'd been there. I told them about the mirror, the voice, everything. They just exchanged worried looks. The principal told my mom I might be adjusting poorly. But that night, as I was lying in bed, I got a text. It was from a number I didn't recognize. No profile picture. It said, "You're late, Ethan." Then another, "Class starts soon." My phone buzzed again, this time a photo. It was me. Sitting at a desk. In room 212. Only I wasn't alone. A pale boy with black eyes sat behind me, smiling. The next morning, my mom found my phone on the floor beside my bed. The police came, searched the woods, checked every camera in the area. They found nothing. No one ever saw me again. But sometimes, students at Harriston High say they hear footsteps down the east wing late at night. The lights flicker and the intercom crackles to life. When Ava and Eric Jensen bought their dream home in the quaint town of Asheville, Pennsylvania, they had no idea what waited for them inside. The Victorian house was a beautiful relic from the late 1800s, its stately brick facade and ornate woodwork promising charm and history. They had fallen in love with the sunlit rooms, the grand staircase, and the sweeping views of the town below. But it was the long hallway on the second floor that held their attention most, a narrow, dimly lit corridor where an imposing antique clock hung above a carved wooden mantel. The clock was unlike any they had ever seen. Its brass hands moved backward, ticking in reverse, counting down instead of up. The realtor had been oddly silent when Ava asked about the clock, quickly changing the subject. Eric joked it was a family heirloom stuck in an endless loop, but Ava's unease grew. They moved in excitedly, eager to start their new life, but from the first night, the clock's backward ticking haunted their dreams. It was rhythmic, persistent, echoing down the hallway like the pounding of a heart running in reverse. On their first night, Ava lay awake in bed, eyes fixed on the clock's face through the darkness. Each tick seemed louder than the last, the hands inching steadily backward, erasing time with a sinister patience. She tried to convince herself it was just a quirk of an old mechanism, but the weight of the sound pressed against her chest. Eric laughed when she mentioned it the next morning, saying, "It's just an old clock, honey. Nothing to worry about." But Ava knew better. Days passed, and the clock continued its backward march. With every hour that passed, Ava felt the house grow colder, the shadows lengthen unnaturally. At random times, the clock would stop ticking altogether, plunging the hallway into an eerie silence that was somehow louder than the ticking. Then, without warning, it would start again, louder and more frantic. One evening, Ava was unpacking boxes in the living room when she heard whispers coming from the hallway. At first, she thought it was Eric, but when she called out, no answer came. The whispers weren't human, they were fragmented words in a language she didn't recognize, urgent and pleading. The sound seemed to synchronize perfectly with the backward ticks, creating a chilling chorus that filled the entire house. That night, Ava's dreams twisted into nightmares. She dreamed of time unraveling, of clocks shattering and spilling dark liquid onto the floorboards. She saw faces trapped inside clock gears, their mouths opening to scream but no sound escaping. When she woke, she found the clock frozen at the number 9, the hands motionless, suspended in time. The following day, Eric vanished. Ava found his side of the bed empty. The front door was locked from the inside. She searched every room, but he was gone without a trace. On the kitchen table lay a note, written in Eric's handwriting but shaky and uneven: "The countdown ends soon. Don't try to stop it." Panic set in. Ava tried to leave the house, but every exit was sealed. Windows refused to open, doors slammed shut just as she reached for the handle. The house was a trap, a prison bound by the ticking clock. Desperate for answers, Ava sought out Mrs. Calloway, Asheville's oldest resident and local historian. The woman's eyes were sharp beneath a crown of silver hair as she listened to Ava's story. "That clock," she said slowly, "was made by a man obsessed with fate and time, a clockmaker named Elias Crow. Legend says he cursed it to count backward, marking the time until the house would claim its next victim." Ava shivered. "Claim? What do you mean?" Mrs. Calloway's voice lowered. "The house isn't just old wooden bricks. It's a vessel, a doorway. When the clock hits 0, whoever is trapped inside becomes part of it, lost to a realm outside time. Some say Elias trapped his own soul there long ago, and the clock counts down to when it will feed again." That night, the clock ticked louder than ever. Ava's heart pounded in sync with the backwards counting. She wandered the dark halls, the whispers growing louder, turning into voices calling her name, begging for release. The walls seemed to breathe, contracting and expanding like lungs. The air grew thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. When the clock struck 3, the house shifted. Walls pulsed like flesh, floors rippled like water. A swirling vortex appeared in the hallway, a dark maw that sucked in light and sound. Ava felt herself drawn toward it, her body pulled by an invisible force. She screamed, fighting with every ounce of strength, but the house was merciless. The vortex enveloped her, dragging her into a cold, timeless void. She was weightless, suspended between moments, surrounded by lost souls trapped in the endless backward ticking. Faces appeared, some pleading, some twisted with despair. They reached for her, whispering the same words, "Don't forget the countdown." Ava's vision blurred as the void closed around her. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the house, the clock's hands reset to 12, beginning the countdown anew. She was trapped in a loop, another victim caught by the clock that counts down. Days later, the realtor showed the house to a new family. They marveled at the antique clock and its strange backward ticking, unaware of the terror it hid. The house waited patiently, counting down to its next victim. Tonight's story comes from the lonely highways of America, where one late-night traveler learned that sometimes, the smallest things, like a hotel window that won't stay shut, can open the door to the darkest night of your life. This is the window that won't shut. It was late September, and the rain had been falling for hours as Emily drove down I-70 through Ohio. 20 years old, traveling solo to visit a friend in Chicago, she had already been behind the wheel for 9 straight hours. Exhausted, her eyes burned with every blink. She knew she couldn't make it another 100 miles without stopping. So, just past midnight, she pulled off at an exit lit by a buzzing neon sign, "Lakewood Inn, vacancy." The building loomed at the edge of the highway, 3 stories tall, with peeling paint and a flickering open-air sign above the front office. Not exactly inviting, but it was better than falling asleep at the wheel. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and lemon cleaner. The night clerk was a gaunt man with sunken eyes who hardly looked up as Emily signed the register. He slid her a plastic key card and muttered, "Room 312. Elevators down the hall." The elevator groaned as it lifted her to the 3rd floor. The carpet in the hallway was stained, the wallpaper bubbled in places. Her room was at the very end of the corridor, far from the few other occupied rooms. She swiped the card, stepped inside, and dropped her bag with a sigh. The room was small, just a queen bed, a dresser, a desk, and a single window overlooking the parking lot. She flicked on the light and froze. The window was cracked open an inch, the thin curtain shifting with the breeze. On the third floor, that struck her as strange. She walked over, slid the pane shut, and locked the latch. Maybe housekeeping had been sloppy. She shrugged it off, changed into sweatpants, and ordered a late-night burger from a nearby delivery app. By the time her food arrived, she had mostly forgotten about the window. She ate on the bed, watching a true crime documentary on her laptop. The sound of the rain outside mixed with the hum of the AC. It almost felt cozy. But not 20 minutes later, she felt it again, a draft. She turned, and her heart skipped. The window was open again. Wider this time. Emily set down her food and got up, frowning. She shut it firmly, tested the latch, and tugged hard just to be sure it stayed in place. For a moment, she considered calling the front desk, but she laughed at herself. It was just a window. Just an old hotel with shoddy maintenance. Still, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that followed. By 1:30 a.m., she was tucked under the covers, scrolling her phone. The rain had stopped, but the highway outside droned with the occasional passing truck. Sleep tugged at her eyes when a sound cut through the silence, a faint scrape. She sat up, listening. The scrape came again. Long, slow. Fingernails across glass. Emily's chest tightened. She turned toward the window. The curtain shifted slightly, though the air was still. She slid out of bed, heart hammering, and pulled them open. The window gaped wide. And smeared along the glass were streaks, as though someone had dragged their fingers down the pane. Emily slammed it shut, her hands trembling. This time she shoved the desk chair under the sill for extra measure. She locked the latch, yanked the curtains closed, and crawled back into bed. She told herself it was a trick of the mind, that she was overtired. But her body stayed tense, every muscle tight, listening. At 2:15 a.m., she jolted awake to a different sound. Not the scrape. A creak. The sound of the floorboards near the desk. Inside the room. Her breath caught. She didn't move. Slowly, she pulled her phone from the nightstand, flicked on the flashlight, and shone it toward the desk. The chair was pushed aside. The window was open again. And crouched in the shadows just inside was a figure. A man. He was thin, gaunt, his skin pale and dirty, his hair stringy and damp. His wide grin revealed crooked, yellow teeth. His eyes locked onto hers, unblinking. "You keep shutting my window," he rasped. Emily screamed, bolting off the bed. She sprinted for the door, fumbling with the lock as the man's footsteps pounded behind her. She wrenched it open and burst into the hallway, her cries echoing down the empty corridor. Doors opened. Groggy guests peered out as the night clerk rushed from the elevator. Emily pointed back at her room, gasping, "Someone's inside." He came through the window. By the time police arrived minutes later, the room was empty. The curtain swayed gently, the window wide open. No footprints, no sign of forced entry. The officers searched the stairwells, the lobby, even the roof, but they found nothing. They suggested it could have been a vagrant who slipped away in the confusion. They told Emily she was safe, but she refused to stay another night. She checked out immediately, suitcase in hand, eyes darting to every shadow. Before leaving, she overheard the manager muttering to one of the officers, "That room's been a problem for years. Guests always complain about the window. Maintenance swears it's fine, but it just won't stay shut." Emily drove until dawn, refusing to look in the rearview mirror. But the image of that man's grin burned itself into her memory. Even now, months later, when she stays in hotels, she checks the windows over and over. She locks them, blocks them with furniture, even tapes them shut if she has to. But in the quiet hours of the night, sometimes she still hears it, the faint scrape of nails against glass, testing, waiting. Because sometimes, a hotel window isn't broken at all. Sometimes it's an invitation. And sometimes it won't stay shut. Jacob and Lisa Reed had been searching for the perfect home for months, and when they finally found the small, weathered house tucked into a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon, they felt their luck had finally changed. The house wasn't new, far from it, but it had character: tall windows framed by cracked paint, creaky wooden floors, and a basement that Jacob immediately pictured transforming into his dream workshop. The realtor was hesitant to share much about the previous owner, an elderly man named Mr. Whitmore, who had sold the house shortly before passing away under somewhat mysterious circumstances. But Jacob and Lisa, eager to start their life together, brushed aside the vague warnings as old realtor cliches. The first few days were filled with the usual chaos of moving, unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and trying to tame the wild garden in the back. But at night, Lisa began to notice strange things happening around the house, especially in the basement. At first, it was subtle: an odd creak, a distant thud, the faintest whisper echoing from below. When she told Jacob, he laughed it off as the natural sounds of an old house settling, or the wind sneaking through cracks. Then, on their third night, everything changed. Jacob was downstairs organizing his tools, setting up the workspace he'd dreamed of since buying the house. Lisa was upstairs, reading in bed, when she suddenly heard his voice cut through the silence, sharp and urgent. "Did you hear that?" she called out, but Jacob was silent for a moment, then replied nervously, "Rent's due." Lisa's heart skipped. "What?" she asked, confused. "Rent's due," he repeated, voice strained and low. "Someone's down here." But when Lisa hurried downstairs, the basement was empty, except for the thick, icy cold that seemed to cling to the walls. Over the next few nights, the voice returned, each time more insistent. "Rent's due. Pay up. You're trespassing." Lisa and Jacob would find tools knocked over, strange scratches on the workbench, and sometimes an old leather-bound ledger left open on the floor, its pages yellowed and worn, but filled with neat handwriting and faded ink. Jacob began researching the house's past, desperate to find answers. He learned that Mr. Whitmore had been the sole occupant of the basement for years, refusing to leave even after the house changed hands. Local whispers spoke of a man obsessed with the idea of rent and possession, a man so tied to the property he could not rest. One evening, Lisa awoke to the unmistakable sound of slow footsteps descending the basement stairs. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and a chill swept into the room. She grabbed Jacob, shaking him awake just as the voice echoed through the house, "Rent's due. Pay now." They rushed to the basement together, only to find a shadowy figure standing near the workbench, a gaunt old man with hollow eyes and a sinister sneer. The air around him was thick with decay, and the temperature dropped sharply. Jacob tried to speak to the apparition, asking what it wanted, but the ghost merely snarled, "You owe. You pay." The spirit seemed tethered to the basement by anger and greed, refusing to let anyone claim the space without paying his price. Lisa tried to reach out with compassion, whispering his name, hoping to calm the restless soul, but the ghost vanished with a rattling groan, leaving behind a freezing silence. They sought help from a local spiritual medium named Evelyn, who came with sage, holy water, and prayers. The cleansing ritual was harrowing. The ghost fought back fiercely, banging pipes, smashing tools, and making the house tremble with rage. Evelyn explained that Whitmore's obsession had bound his spirit tightly to the basement, and only by acknowledging his torment and offering him release could they find peace. They performed a ceremony, reading passages and leaving offerings of old coins and notes, symbolic payments meant to satisfy the dead tenant's demands. For a while, it seemed to work. The basement remained silent, and the oppressive chill lifted. Jacob set up his workshop without interruption, and Lisa no longer felt watched. But the reprieve was short-lived. One night, Lisa awoke to the basement door slowly creaking open again. She heard footsteps, slow, measured, deliberate, descending the stairs. The voice was back, colder and more menacing than ever, "Rent's due." This time, the haunting escalated. Lights flickered violently, shadows danced on the walls, and objects began moving on their own. An ancient ledger appeared on the workbench, its pages flipping wildly, stopping on a list of names, all previous owners and renters, each with a due date and unpaid balance scrawled beside them. Lisa shuddered as she recognized the name read at the bottom, marked in fresh red ink. Jacob and Lisa realized they were caught in a curse. Whitmore's spirit was bound to the basement, endlessly demanding rent from the living. The house wasn't just haunted, it was a prison where debts must be paid forever, trapping anyone who dared claim the space. Desperation drove them to research old newspapers and town records, uncovering a history of tenants who vanished under mysterious circumstances, their disappearances marked by reports of strange sounds and eerie shadows around the house. As the nights grew darker, the spirit's presence became more violent. Lisa found herself waking in cold sweats, feeling invisible hands gripping her arms. Jacob's tools would fly off tables during his work, and unexplained scratches marred the walls. They tried everything, from holy water to salt lines, but the entity was relentless. One fateful night, the basement door slammed open with a force that rattled the entire house. Jacob and Lisa stood frozen as a ghostly figure emerged from the shadows, Whitmore himself, his face twisted with rage and sorrow, a spectral landlord demanding his due. The room filled with whispers of unpaid rent, lost years, and broken promises. "You owe," he hissed, voice like dry leaves scraping. "Pay or join me." Panic surged through them. They realized the only way to escape was to settle the debt, a symbolic payment to break the curse. With trembling hands, Lisa placed a stack of old bills and coins on the workbench and recited a plea for forgiveness and release. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then, Whitmore's figure flickered and dissolved, the house falling into an eerie silence. In the following days, the oppressive feeling lifted. The basement felt warm, inviting even, and the strange noises stopped. Jacob finally set up his workshop without fear, and Lisa felt safe in their home once more. But sometimes, late at night, Lisa hears the soft creak of the basement door, and a voice just barely audible whispers, "Rent's due." And she wonders if some debts are never truly paid.